The DNA test proved baby Oladapo was the rightful heir to $400 million. But what the test couldn't reveal was that someone had been manipulating this pregnancy from the very beginning. And when Chioma discovered who, she realized the most dangerous person in her life wasn't Tolani or the scheming wives. It was someone she'd trusted completely. If you enjoy thrilling African stories, don't forget to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and tell us where you are watching from. Your support means the world to us. 3 months after baby Oladapo's birth, Chioma stood in the small Lekki house kitchen at 2 in the morning, nursing her son while watching Chidi sleep on the couch. He'd moved back in permanently after the DNA results, claiming he needed to protect them from Tolani's next move. But something had been bothering Chioma for weeks now, a small detail that kept circling her mind like a vulture waiting for death. The doctor had said it was a 1 in a million chance. The samples from Chief Adeleke should have been practically worthless, destroyed by cancer medication and age. The pregnancy shouldn't have worked. But it did work. Perfectly. Within 24 hours of the procedure. What if someone made sure it worked? Chioma had learned in Ajegunle that when something seemed too good to be true, someone was usually getting played. And as she watched Chidi sleep, she couldn't shake the feeling that she'd been playing a game where everyone knew the rules except her. The legal battle with Tolani had intensified over the past 3 months. The competency challenge was working its way through the courts, with medical experts arguing both sides. Chief Adeleke's cancer medication could have affected his judgment, or it could have sharpened his focus on legacy. The case could take years to resolve, and until then, every naira of the inheritance remained frozen, except for the monthly allowance that kept Chioma and baby Oladapo fed and housed, but not wealthy. Chidi's 20%, roughly $80 million, was also frozen. He'd given up his tech business to focus full-time on fighting Tolani's legal challenges, which meant he was living off savings and the hope of eventual payout. He'd chosen Chioma and the baby over guaranteed money, over his own security, over everything. Or had he? The thought made Chioma sick, but she couldn't ignore it anymore. What if Chidi's protection wasn't about love or loyalty? What if he'd been playing a longer game than anyone realized? She needed answers, and she knew exactly where to start. The next morning, while Chidi was meeting with lawyers and baby Oladapo slept in his crib, Chioma took a taxi to Dr. Okonkwo's clinic in Victoria Island. She'd called ahead, asking for a private consultation about postpartum health, but that wasn't why she was really there. Dr. Okonkwo seemed nervous when she arrived, his usual professional calm cracked around the edges. "Mrs. Adeleke, how can I help you today? Is the baby well?" "The baby is perfect. Too perfect, actually. That's what I want to talk about." Chioma sat down in his office, baby Oladapo in her arms. "You said the pregnancy was a 1 in a million chance, that Chief Adeleke's samples should have been worthless, but it worked within 24 hours. How?" The doctor's face went carefully blank. "Sometimes medical science can't explain everything. The human body." "Please don't insult me with medical talk. I'm from Ajegunle, not a village. I know when someone is hiding something." Chioma leaned forward. "What did you do to make sure this pregnancy worked?" The doctor was quiet for a long moment, his hands trembling slightly as he adjusted his glasses. "I did nothing unethical. I want to be clear about that. The procedure was performed exactly as it should have been. But someone came to me 3 days before the procedure, someone who knew about Chief Adeleke's plan, who knew about you, who knew about the timeline. This person asked me a hypothetical question about improving success rates for artificial insemination with compromised samples." Chioma's heart started pounding. "Who?" "I can't tell you that. Doctor-patient confidentiality. I'm not asking as a patient. I'm asking as a mother whose baby might have been part of someone's scheme. Who came to you?" The doctor stood up and walked to his window, looking out at Victoria Island traffic. "The person asked if there were ways to enhance the viability of Chief Adeleke's samples. I explained that yes, there are medical techniques, sperm sorting, concentration methods, timing optimization, all legal,
all ethical, all designed to help couples struggling with fertility. And did you use these techniques?
Yes, because the person who asked me said Chief Adeleke wanted every possible advantage. Said the chief was desperate for this to work and was willing to pay for premium procedures. I received an additional 2 million naira for the enhanced protocol. From who? The payment came through an offshore account, untraceable, but the person who approached me initially was someone close to the chief, someone who had access to his medical files, who knew the timeline, who understood what was at stake. Chioma felt cold despite the Lagos heat. Was it Chidi? Dr. Okongo turned from the window, his expression confirming what she'd feared. I never said that, but I will say this. The person who approached me stood to gain significantly if the pregnancy succeeded, and they knew details about the will that only family members would know, details that went public until after the chief died. Chioma left the clinic in a daze. Chidi had known about the pregnancy plan before it happened. He'd known about the will provisions. He'd known that improving the success rate meant improving his chances at $80 million. But wait, that didn't make sense. If Chidi wanted the pregnancy to succeed for the money, why would he have fought with his uncle 3 years ago? Why would he have been exiled from the family? Unless the fight was fake. Unless the whole estrangement was theater designed to position him as the honest nephew, the one person the dying chief could trust when everyone else was corrupt. Chioma's mind raced as the taxi drove through Lagos traffic. If Chidi had manipulated the chief into trusting him, if he'd arranged for the pregnancy to succeed, if he'd orchestrated everything from the beginning, then what did that make her? A pawn. A vessel, a convenient poor girl from Ajegunle who'd be grateful enough to marry a dying billionaire and desperate enough to carry his child. She felt sick, but she also felt angry. Because if this was true, if Chidi had played her from the start, then she'd spent 3 months falling in love with someone who saw her as a business investment. When she got back to the Lekki house, Chidi was there, playing with baby Oladapo on the living room floor. The sight that should have warmed her heart instead filled her with suspicion. How was the doctor? He asked, not looking up from making the baby laugh. Informative. Chioma put down her bag and sat on the couch. Chidi, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. He looked up then, something in her tone making him alert. Okay. Did you know about your uncle's plan before he told you, before he called you back from exile? The silence stretched too long. That was answer enough. You did, didn't you? You knew everything. Chidi picked up the baby and stood slowly. It's not what you think. Then tell me what it is, because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you manipulated a dying man into trusting you, paid a doctor to make sure I got pregnant, and played the role of reluctant protector while really just protecting your own investment. That's not fair. Fair? Chioma laughed bitterly. I was selling groundnuts at Ojuelegba when your uncle's lawyer found me. I was 2 months behind rent in Ajegunle. I was desperate. And someone needed me to be desperate, didn't they? Someone needed a girl poor enough to marry a dying billionaire, grateful enough to follow instructions, and too uneducated to ask difficult questions. Chidi put the baby in his crib and turned to face her. You're right about some of it, but not all of it. Then explain, all of it, the truth. He sat down heavily, running his hair through his hair. The fight with my uncle 3 years ago was real. The corruption I found was real. The exile was real. But 6 months before he died, he reached out to me privately, not through Williams, through a personal email. He told me he was dying. He told me he wanted a son. He told me he was looking for a wife who'd be willing to do artificial insemination. And you suggested me? No. He'd already found you. Williams had already approached you at the traffic light, but my uncle wanted my opinion. He sent me your information, your background, your situation. He asked if I thought you'd go through with it.
And what did you say? I said you would, because desperate people do desperate things. And then I hated myself for saying it. Chidi looked at her directly. But I also told him that if he was going to do this, he needed to make sure the pregnancy actually worked. Because asking a girl to marry him and then feigning to get her pregnant would leave you in an impossible position, married to a dead man with nothing to show for it.
So you paid the doctor to enhance the procedure? Yes, 2 million naira of my own money, to give you the best possible chance of actually getting what my uncle promised, because I didn't want you to suffer for nothing. Chioma wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to believe him. But you stood to gain $80 million if it worked. I didn't know about the 20% until after he died. That wasn't part of our conversations. He added that to the will later, probably as insurance to make sure I'd actually protect you. Chidi leaned forward. Chioma, I'm not going to lie and say I'm some noble hero. I paid for the procedure enhancement partly because I felt guilty about you being used, and partly because I knew if the pregnancy worked, I'd be involved in managing the inheritance somehow. But I didn't know the specific terms, and I definitely didn't plan on falling in love with you. There it was, the word neither of them had said yet. You don't love me, Chioma said quietly. You love what I represent, $80 million, revenge against your uncle's greedy family, a win after 3 years of exile. I love you, Chidi said, his voice rough. I love how you survived everything Tolani threw at you. I love how you carried that baby through poisoning and early labor and isolation. I love how you're smart enough to figure out what I did and brave enough to confront me about it. And yes, I started this as a business arrangement. But somewhere between the servants' quarters and the hospital and the 3 a.m. feedings, it became real. You became the most important thing, not the money. You. Chioma looked at the man who'd protected her, who'd given up his business for her, who'd chosen her over maintaining professional distance, even when it threatened his inheritance. She wanted to believe him, but trust was expensive, and she'd already paid too high a price for survival. I need time, she said. I need to think about this without you here, without the baby needing attention, without everything pressing down on me. Can you give me that? Chidi nodded slowly. How much time? I don't know. Maybe days, maybe weeks, maybe forever. Chioma picked up baby Oladapo from his crib. But right now, I need you to leave. Chioma, please, just leave. He left. And for the first time since the pregnancy began, Chioma was truly alone with her son and her thoughts and the terrible knowledge that everyone she'd trusted had been playing games with her life. But what she didn't know, what nobody knew yet, was that while she'd been at Dr. Okonkwo's clinic discovering Chidi's manipulation, Tolani had been making her own discovery, and this one was far more dangerous. Tolani sat in her private sitting room with a different doctor, a genetics expert she'd paid 1 million naira for a second opinion on baby Oladapo's DNA results. She'd obtained a copy of the test through her lawyers during discovery, and something about the results had bothered her from the beginning. Explain this to me again, Tolani said, pointing at the genetic markers on the report. The genetics expert, Dr. Ibrahim Musa, adjusted his reading glasses. The paternity test confirms that baby Oladapo is Chief Adeleke's biological son, no question about that. But there's an anomaly in the genetic sequencing that's highly unusual. What kind of anomaly? The baby's DNA shows markers consistent with artificial insemination, which we already knew. But the specific genetic pattern suggests that the sample used wasn't random. It was selected, sorted, enhanced. In English, Doctor. Someone used advanced reproductive technology to choose the sperm most likely to produce a male child. It's a technique called sperm sorting or sex selection. It's legal in Nigeria for medical reasons, but ethically questionable for preference-based selection. And it's expensive, very expensive. Tolani leaned back in her chair. So someone paid extra to make sure the baby would be a boy. Not just someone. The procedure would have required the cooperation of the fertility specialist performing the insemination, and it would have cost somewhere between 2 and 5 million naira beyond the standard procedure. Who paid for it?
That I cannot tell you from the DNA alone, but I can tell you this. Whoever paid for it knew that Chief Adeleke's will specified a male heir. They knew that only a son would inherit everything. They didn't leave it to chance. They engineered the outcome. Tolani smiled slowly. This was exactly what she needed. Not to prove the baby wasn't the chief's son, but to prove the pregnancy was the result of manipulation and conspiracy. And if she could prove conspiracy, she could argue that the will should be invalidated because it was based on fraudulent premises. Can you testify to this in court? If subpoenaed, yes. Then prepare your testimony. I'm going to bury that Ajegunle girl and whoever helped her scheme their way into my husband's fortune. Tolani's next move was calculated and brutal. She filed an emergency motion with the probate court, arguing that new evidence had emerged, suggesting the pregnancy was the result of conspiracy and fraud. She attached Dr. Musa's analysis showing the sex selection, and she demanded a full investigation into who had paid for the enhanced procedures. The court granted her motion within a week, which meant Chioma, Chidi, Dr. Okonkwo, and Williams all received subpoenas requiring them to testify under oath about every aspect of the pregnancy, the payments, and the planning. Chioma received her subpoena on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a process server who looked uncomfortable handing legal documents to a girl holding a 3-month-old baby. She read it twice, not fully understanding the legal language, before calling Williams for explanation. It means Tolani found evidence of the sex selection procedure, Williams said carefully. She's arguing that the pregnancy was fraudulent because it was engineered rather than natural. But the DNA test proved paternity. This is different. This is about whether the entire plan was a conspiracy to defraud the estate. If the court decides it was, they could invalidate the will provisions regarding baby Oladapo's inheritance. Can they do that? Legally, it's complicated, but Tolani has unlimited resources to fight this, and she's found a legitimate angle of attack. You're going to need to testify about everything: who approached you about the pregnancy, who paid for what, who knew what and when. And if I tell the truth that Chidi paid for the enhanced procedure? Williams was quiet for a moment. Then Chidi will likely lose his guardianship position for failing to disclose material information to the court, and you might lose the inheritance entirely if the court decides the pregnancy was fraudulent from the start. So I have to choose between telling the truth and losing everything, or lying under oath and committing perjury? I'm not advising you to lie. I'm advising you to speak with Chidi and coordinate your testimony so that the truth, whatever it is presented in the most favorable light possible. But Chioma had sent Chidi away, and she wasn't ready to call him back just to coordinate their lies. That night, with baby Oladapo sleeping in his crib and the subpoena sitting on her kitchen table like a curse, Chioma made a decision. She was done being played, done being the convenient pawn in other people's games. If Chidi had manipulated the pregnancy, if the wives were trying to steal the inheritance, if the whole system was rigged against poor girls from Ajegunle, then she was going to stop playing their game and start playing her own. She called Chinwe, the only person in the Adeleke family who'd ever shown her genuine kindness. "I need your help," Chinwe said when the 18-year-old answered, "and I need you to be honest with me about something." "Okay." "Did your father ever talk to you about his plan for a male heir before he married me?" Chinwe was quiet for a long moment. "Yes. He told me he was going to try one more time. He said he was tired of watching his daughters fight over money they hadn't earned. He said a son would bring the family together or tear it apart, but at least it would be decisive." "Did he mention Chidi?" "He said Chidi was the only person in the family smart enough to see through everyone's schemes and ruthless enough to fight them. He said he was going to bring Chidi back to manage things after he died." "Did he say anything about making sure the pregnancy worked?" Another pause. "He said he was going to spend whatever it took to give himself the best chance at a son. He said if he was going to ask a young girl to sacrifice her youth for his legacy, he owed her at least a chance at success." "Why are you asking me this?"
Chioma explained about the subpoena, about the sex selection evidence, about Tolani's fraud accusations. "So my mother found proof that someone paid extra to make sure you had a boy," Chinwe said slowly, "and now she's trying to use that to invalidate the entire will." "Yes. But if Daddy authorized the payment, if he was the one who wanted the sex selection, then it's not fraud. It's just him spending his own money to ensure his own plan worked." Chioma sat up straighter. "Can you prove that? Can you prove your father authorized the enhanced procedure?" "Maybe. He kept private files in his study, things he didn't share with his wives or Williams, things only I knew about because I used to help him organize his office. If there's documentation about the payment, it would be there." "Would your mother have destroyed it by now?" "No. She's been too busy with the legal challenges to bother with Daddy's old office. She thinks the important documents were all with Williams. She doesn't know about the private files." "Can you get them?" "I can try. But Chioma, if I do this, if I help you, I'm betraying my family. I'm choosing you over my own family." "I know, and I can't ask you to do that. But your father wanted a son. He went to all this trouble, all this expense, all this planning. If we let your mother destroy that just because she's angry about being left out, then he died for nothing." Chinwe was quiet for a long moment. "I'll get you the files, but you have to promise me something." "What?" "When this is over, when Oladapo inherits everything, you have to make sure my mother and my sisters aren't left with nothing. Daddy's will provides for them, but I want your word that you'll honor those provisions, that you won't become like them, fighting over every naira." "I promise. I just want enough to give my siblings a good life and raise Oladapo safely. I don't need billions." "Then I'll help you. Give me 3 days." 3 days later, Chinwe showed up at the Lekki house at midnight with a cardboard box full of Chief Adeleke's private files. Bank statements showing a 3 million naira payment to Dr. Okonkwo, specifically marked Enhanced Reproductive Procedures, Sex Selection Authorized. Emails between the chief and a reproductive specialist discussing the ethics and legality of preferring a male heir. Handwritten notes about wanting to give his final wife every advantage possible because he was asking her to sacrifice so much for an old man's vanity. It was all there, proof that Chief Adeleke himself had authorized and paid for the sex selection, proof that there was no conspiracy, no fraud, just a dying man spending his own money to maximize his chances at the legacy he desperately wanted. "This changes everything," Chioma whispered, reading through the documents by lamplight while baby Oladapo slept and Chinwe sat beside her. "It means my mother's fraud case falls apart," Chinwe agreed. "She can't claim conspiracy if Daddy himself ordered the procedures. I need to get these to Williams immediately. There's something else in there you should see." Chinwe pulled out a sealed envelope addressed to "My son's mother, whoever she may be." Chioma opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a handwritten letter from Chief Adeleke, dated 2 days before his death. The letter read, "To the woman who gave me a son. If you are reading this, then my plan worked. You carried my child to term. You gave birth to a boy. You survived my wives' schemes and my family's greed, and for that I thank you. I know what I asked of you was unfair. I know marrying a dying old man, carrying his child through artificial means, enduring the hatred of women who saw you as a threat, none of it was just or kind. But desperation makes monsters of good men, and I was desperate. I have left you provisions in my will, a house, money, security for you and our son, but more than that, I have left you Chidi, my nephew, the only honest person in my corrupt family. I manipulated him back into my life by playing on his sense of family duty, but I kept him there by making him see you as a person worth protecting. He paid for the sex selection procedure. I know this because I saw the bank transfer and I confronted him about it. He said he did it because he couldn't stand the thought of you suffering through pregnancy for nothing. He said you deserved at least a fighting chance.
I added the 20% guardianship provision to my will after that conversation, not because I thought he needed financial incentive to protect you, but because I realized he already cared about you more than he cared about my money. And anyone who chooses people over naira
is someone I can trust with my son's future. Be careful of my family. Be careful of Williams. Be careful of everyone except Chidi and Chinwe. They are the only two people in this entire mess who have clean hands. Raise my son to be better than I was. Teach him that legacy isn't about money or male heirs or buildings with your name. It's about the choices you make when no one is watching, the people you protect when it costs you something, the dignity you maintain when the world wants to break you. You're stronger than I ever was. Survive this, and forgive an old man for using your strength to build something that might outlast his many mistakes. Chief Oladapo Adeleke. Chioma read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face. The chief had known everything. He'd known about Chidi's payment, about Chinwe's kindness, about the wives' schemes. He'd planned for all of it, manipulated all of it, but in service of protecting a son he'd never meet and a woman he'd barely known. He really did care, Chioma whispered. In his way, yes, Chinwe said softly. He was a terrible husband to my mothers and a complicated father to us daughters, but he wanted this son to have a better start, a mother who actually wanted him, a guardian who would protect him, a chance at something other than fighting over inherited wealth. I need to call Chidi. I thought you sent him away. I did, because I thought he'd manipulated everything for money. But if your father knew about the payment, if he approved of it, if he trusted Chidi despite it, Chioma looked at the letter again, then maybe I was wrong about his motives. She called Chidi at 12:30 in the morning. He answered on the first ring, sounding wide awake. Chioma, is everything okay? Is the baby fine? I'm fine, but I need you to come here now. I have something to show you. He arrived 20 minutes later, looking exhausted and worried. When he saw Chinwe there, confusion crossed his face. What's going on? Chioma handed him the letter. She watched his face as he read, watched the emotions play across his features, surprise, relief, guilt, and finally something like grief. He knew, Chidi said quietly. He knew I paid for the sex selection, and he didn't say anything. He said you did it to protect me. Is that true? Chidi looked at her directly. Yes, I told you the truth before. I paid for the enhanced procedure partly out of guilt and partly out of self-interest, but mostly because I couldn't stomach the thought of you going through all of this for nothing. You deserved at least a fighting chance at the security my uncle promised. And the 20%? You really didn't know? I really didn't know. He must have added it after our conversation about the payment. Chidi ran his hands through his hair. God, he was manipulative until the very end, making sure everyone was positioned exactly where they wanted them. But he trusted you, even knowing about the payment, even knowing you weren't perfectly noble. He trusted you with his son. He trusted both of us. Chidi looked at Chinwe. Thank you for bringing these files. You just saved us from Tolani's fraud case. I didn't do it for you. I did it for my father, and for Chioma, and for Oladapo. You're just the annoying side benefit. Despite everything, Chioma laughed. It felt good to laugh. It felt good to have evidence that would destroy Tolani's case. It felt good to know that the chief had chosen her deliberately, knowing she was strong enough to survive his family's worst plots. But the feeling didn't last long, because 2 days later, when Williams submitted the private files to the court as evidence against Tolani's fraud claim, someone tried to kill Chioma. It happened in day broad light. Chioma was walking to the market with baby Oladapo strapped to her back in traditional rapper style, buying vegetables for dinner. A car jumped the curb at high speed, aimed directly at her. She dove behind a fruit stand at the last second, protecting the baby with her body, while the car crashed into the stand and sent oranges rolling everywhere.
The driver backed up and tried again. This time, market women started screaming and throwing things at the car. A taxi driver deliberately blocked the road, and the attacker fled, leaving Chioma shaking and terrified with baby Oladapo crying against her back. The police came. They took statements. They promised to investigate, but everyone in the market knew what this was. Someone had tried to kill the mother of Chief Adeleke's heir. And in Lagos, where money bought anything, including murder, that someone probably wouldn't be caught unless they wanted to be. Chidi arrived at the police station within an hour, pale and furious. "You're moving back to the mansion," he said. "What? No, that's where Tolani and the wives. That's where there's 24-hour security and gates and guards. Someone just tried to kill you in a public market. The Lekki house isn't safe anymore. The mansion has security infrastructure that can actually protect you. Tolani will make my life hell. Tolani will be arrested if anything happens to you on mansion property. The police might ignore an accident in a market, but they can't ignore murder inside a high-profile estate." Chidi pulled out his phone. "I'm calling Williams. We're invoking the will's protective custody provisions. As guardian, I have the right to move you and the baby into the main estate for safety reasons." Tolani won't allow it. Tolani doesn't have a choice. The will's provisions override her authority as wife. If I say you need protective custody in the mansion, that's where you're going. They moved that night, back to the Adeleke compound where this whole nightmare had started. But this time, instead of being housed in the servants' quarters or the bride's apartment, Chioma was given a full suite in the main house with round-the-clock security posted at her door. Tolani watched from the parlor as Chioma walked in holding baby Oladapo, Chidi beside her with protective fury in his every movement. The other wives gathered like vultures, whispering, calculating, planning. "This is my house," Tolani said coldly. "This is Chief Adeleke's house," Chidi corrected. "And according to his will, it belongs to his son now. Chioma is the boy's mother and lives here at my discretion as guardian. If you have a problem with that, take it up with the probate court." "Someone tried to kill her in a market. What makes you think she'll be safer here?" "Because if she dies here, you become the prime suspect, and even your expensive lawyers can't save you from a murder charge with this much evidence trail." Chidi stepped closer to Tolani. "I know you hired surveillance on the Lekki house. I know you've been plotting ways to invalidate the will. But if you harm one hair on her head or one finger on that baby, I will dedicate every naira of my 20% to making sure you spend the rest of your life in prison. Are we clear?" Tolani's smile was poisonous, crystal clear. "Welcome home, Chioma. I do hope you survive your stay." That night, Chioma lay in the expensive bed in the main house, baby Oladapo sleeping in a crib beside her, and tried to process how her life had circled back to this mansion. 6 months ago, she'd been wife number 6. Now she was the mother of the primary heir, living in the same house with the women who wanted her dead, protected by a man she still wasn't sure she could fully trust. Chidi had taken the room next door, refusing to leave her unprotected. Joseph, the elderly security guard, had been promoted to head of personal security and stationed outside her door. And somewhere in this massive mansion, Tolani and her allies were plotting their next move. Chioma couldn't sleep. Around midnight, she heard soft footsteps in the hallway. Then a knock on her door. "It's me," Chinwe's voice called quietly. Chioma opened the door to find the youngest daughter looking pale and frightened. "What's wrong?" "I heard my mother on the phone an hour ago. She was talking to someone about the market attack. She said it was too public, too sloppy. She said next time they need to be more careful, more private." "She ordered the attack?" "I don't know for certain, but the way she talked, Chioma, you need to be careful. My mother is desperate. The files you submitted destroyed her fraud case. The court ruled yesterday that there's no evidence of conspiracy, that Daddy authorized all the procedures himself, which means her last legal option just evaporated. She has no legitimate way to contest the will anymore. So she'll try illegitimate ways."
She'll try anything, and she has money to hire people who make problems disappear. Chinwe grabbed Chioma's hand. "Please be careful. Don't eat anything that hasn't been prepared by Chidi or Joseph. Don't go anywhere without security. Don't trust anyone except the people Daddy said you could trust." After Chinwe left, Chioma locked the door and pushed a chair against it for extra security. Then she took baby Oladapo from his crib and held him close, feeling his tiny heartbeat against her chest. "Your grandfather asked me to survive this," she whispered to the sleeping baby. "So that's what I'm going to do. For you, for me, for your Uncle Michael and Aunt Blessing, who are finally going to good schools because of the allowance. I'm going to survive, and you're going to grow up safe, and we're going to make something good out of all this corruption and scheming and death." The baby stirred in his sleep, one tiny hand curling around her finger. And somewhere in another part of the mansion, Tolani made a phone call to someone who specialized in making murders look like accidents. Because if legal challenges wouldn't work and public attacks were too risky, then the solution was obvious. Make the girl disappear. Make it look natural, a tragic accident, maybe a car crash on the way to visit her siblings, maybe a fall down the mansion stairs, maybe contaminated food that caused a fatal allergic reaction. Anything that couldn't be definitively traced back to Tolani, but would solve the problem permanently. With Chioma dead, baby Oladapo would need a new guardian, and without Chidi's protection, Tolani could petition the court to appoint one of her own daughters. And once her family controlled the baby's guardianship, the inheritance would effectively be under their control until the boy turned 21. 18 years of managing $400 million. Plenty of time to siphon enough away to secure her daughter's futures. It was a good plan, a patient plan, and it was already in motion. What Tolani didn't know was that Williams, the family lawyer, had his own plans. He'd served Chief Adeleke for 30 years, watched him build an empire, watched him destroy 4 marriages and alienate 12 daughters. And Williams had a secret that would change everything if it ever came out. He was baby Oladapo's real grandfather. 25 years ago, before Williams became the Adeleke family lawyer, he'd had a brief affair with Tolani. She'd gotten pregnant, but she told everyone, including Williams, that the baby was Chief Adeleke's daughter. Williams had watched his biological child grow up calling another man father, watched Tolani use the pregnancy to secure her position as favorite wife, watched his daughter Ngozi become a spoiled, entitled woman who'd never known her real parentage. And now, watching this whole inheritance battle play out, Williams had to make a choice. Reveal the truth and destroy Tolani's reputation while acknowledging her own daughter's illegitimacy, or stay silent and let an innocent girl from Ajegunle possibly die to protect secrets that were eating him alive. He chose truth. Finally, after 25 years of lies, he chose truth. Williams went to Chidi's room at the mansion at 3 in the morning and told him everything. About the affair, about Ngozi's real parentage, about Tolani's lifelong deception, about the fact that at least one of Chief Adeleke's daughters wasn't biologically his. "Can you prove this?" asked Chidi, mind racing through implications. "DNA test. Ngozi and I share genetic markers that would prove paternity. The chief never tested any of the girls because he trusted Tolani in the beginning, before she became what she is now. If this comes out, it destroys Tolani's credibility completely. It proves she's been lying to the chief for decades. It undermines every claim she's made about honoring his wishes or protecting his legacy. It also destroys Ngozi's life. She'll learn her entire identity is a lie, that her father wasn't her father, that her mother is a fraud." Williams looked older than his 58 years. "But I can't watch Tolani kill an innocent girl to protect secrets I helped her build. I won't have that on my conscience." "Does Tolani know you're here?" "Tolani thinks I'm still her loyal servant, bound by 30 years of complicity in her schemes. She doesn't know I'm done." Chidi stood up and paced his room. "If we reveal this now, it blows up the entire inheritance case. It proves Tolani has no moral authority to challenge anything. It possibly invalidates Ngozi's inheritance claims. It definitely destroys any sympathy the court might have had for the wife's position. It also makes Tolani infinitely more dangerous, a woman with nothing left to lose and millions to spend on revenge." Williams met Chidi's eyes. "But it might save Chioma's life. Because if Tolani is exposed publicly as a fraud and a liar, any accident that happens to Chioma afterward becomes automatically suspicious. Tolani won't be able to hide behind respectability anymore. We need to tell Chioma." They woke her at 3:30 in the morning. Chioma listened to Williams's confession with baby Oladapo sleeping in her arms, her expression shifting from shock to calculation. "So Ngozi, the 41-year-old daughter who lost money in cryptocurrency, isn't actually Chief Adeleke's child?" "Correct.
And you have proof? I can get proof. A DNA test would take a week. And if we reveal this, it destroys Tolani's credibility, but also possibly saves my life by making me too high profile to kill quietly? That's the theory. Chioma looked at Chidi. What do you think? I think Williams is right that revealing this makes you safer in the short term, but I also think it makes everyone more dangerous in the long term. Tolani won't just disappear. She'll fight back, and a cornered animal is the most dangerous kind. More dangerous than a predator who thinks she's winning? Chioma shook her head. If Tolani believes she can get away with killing me, she'll keep trying. But if we expose her publicly, make her the villain in everyone's eyes, she'll have to be more careful, or risk being the obvious suspect when something happens to me. You're talking about using yourself as bait. I'm talking about controlling the narrative. Right now, I'm the Ajegunle girl who married a billionaire and got lucky with a pregnancy. Tolani is the grieving widow protecting her husband's legacy. But if we flip that, if she becomes the unfaithful wife who lied for decades, and I become the honest mother protecting her son, then the whole power dynamic changes. Williams nodded slowly. The court of public opinion matters in Lagos, especially in high society inheritance cases. If Tolani loses social standing, she loses influence, and influence is what's keeping her dangerous. Then we do it, Chioma decided. We expose the affair, we prove Ngozi's real parentage, we destroy Tolani's credibility, and we make sure everyone in Lagos knows that if something happens to me, she's the first person to investigate. They spent the next week gathering evidence. Williams submitted to a DNA test. Ngozi, unaware of what was happening, was tricked into providing a sample through a routine health screening that Chinwe arranged. The results came back exactly as Williams had said, 99.9% probability that he was Ngozi's biological father. Armed with proof, they went public. Not through the courts first, but through the media. Chidi gave an exclusive interview to Lagos's most popular investigative journalist, providing DNA evidence, testimony from Williams, and a timeline of Tolani's deception. The story exploded. Billionaire's widow exposed, decades of lies, illegitimate heir, and murder plot, screamed the headlines. Within 24 hours, every news outlet in Nigeria was covering the story. Chief Adeleke, respected widow of one of Lagos's most prominent businessmen, revealed to have deceived her husband for 25 years. Her eldest daughter, Ngozi, not actually Chief Adeleke's child, the family lawyer confessing to the affair and providing evidence, and buried in the coverage, mentions of the recent attempt on Chioma's life and speculation about Tolani's motives. The social fallout was immediate and devastating. Tolani's friends abandoned her. Her charitable foundation lost donors. Her daughters faced questions about their own paternity. And Ngozi, learning the truth from news reports like everyone else, had a public breakdown that made everything worse. But Tolani didn't retreat. She doubled down. She held her own press conference, dressed in expensive traditional attire, playing the role of wronged woman with decades of practice. Yes, I made a mistake 25 years ago, a moment of weakness with a man who took advantage of my youth. But my husband forgave me. He raised Ngozi as his own daughter because he was a generous man. And now, years after his death, these people want to destroy my family's reputation to steal his fortune. The journalist asked the obvious question. Are you saying you told Chief Adeleke about the affair? Tolani didn't hesitate. Of course I told him, years ago. We worked through it as a couple. He accepted Ngozi as his own daughter regardless of biology, because that's what fathers do. And now his nephew and this girl from Ajegunle want to use an old family secret to justify taking everything he built?
It was a good lie, completely unprovable since the chief was dead, but it shifted the narrative just enough to create doubt. Maybe Tolani was the villain. Or maybe she was a woman who'd made one mistake decades ago and was now being punished for it by greedy relatives trying to steal an inheritance. Lagos society split into camps. Some believed Tolani was a fraud and a would-be murderer. Others believed she was a grieving widow being attacked by gold diggers. The truth, as always, was somewhere in the complicated middle. But the exposure had the effect Chioma hoped for. Tolani couldn't touch her now without everyone immediately suspecting murder. The market attack was being reinvestigated with new scrutiny. Tolani's phone records were subpoenaed. Her finances were being examined for suspicious payments.
She was dangerous, yes, but she was also exposed, and exposure was a kind of protection. The probate case dragged on. Months turned into half a year. The competency challenge had failed. The fraud accusations had collapsed. But Tolani's lawyers kept finding new angles of attack. Procedural challenges, jurisdictional questions, anything to delay the final distribution of the inheritance. And through it all, Chioma lived in the mansion with baby Oladapo, protected by Chidi and Joseph, watched by hostile wives, caught between the life she'd left behind in Ajegunle and the wealth she couldn't yet access. Her siblings visited regularly. Michael was thriving in a good secondary school, talking about university. Blessing had friends her own age and dreams about becoming a doctor. The monthly allowance kept them comfortable but not wealthy, and Chioma made sure they remembered where they came from. Chidi stayed. Despite the frozen inheritance, despite the lack of guaranteed payout, despite everything, he stayed, in the room next to hers, helping with late-night feedings, playing with baby Oladapo during the day, fighting legal battles during business hours. And slowly, carefully, Chioma let herself trust him again. Not because he was perfect or noble or uncomplicated, but because he was there, consistently, stubbornly there, even when being there cost him money and peace and certainty. One evening, when baby Oladapo was 8 months old and starting to crawl, Chioma found Chidi sitting in the mansion garden where they'd first met. "Thinking about giving up yet?" she asked, sitting beside him on the bench. "Every day," he admitted. "Every day I think about walking away from this mess, going back to my tech business, finding a normal woman who comes with normal problems instead of death threats and inheritance battles." "But you don't leave." "But I don't leave." He looked at her. "Do you know why?" "Tell me." "Because somewhere between the servants' quarters and the hospital and the 8 months of living in this mansion with you, I realized something. My uncle was right about legacy. It's not about buildings or money or male heirs. It's about the choices you make when it would be easier to walk away. It's about protecting people who need protecting, not because you'll get paid, but because letting them suffer would destroy something essential in you." That's very philosophical for a man who started this for $80 million. "I started this for $80 million. I'm staying for you. There's a difference." Chioma leaned her head on his shoulder. "When this is over, when the inheritance finally comes through and Oladapo is secure and Tolani can't touch us anymore, what happens to us?" "What do you want to happen?" "I want what your uncle described in his letter, people choosing people over money. Dignity when the world wants to break us, something real that outlasts all these schemes and manipulations." "Then that's what we'll build," Chidi said quietly. But building something real would have to wait, because the next morning, Tolani made her final, desperate move. She'd spent months burning through her personal fortune on lawyers and private investigators and failed schemes. Her credibility was destroyed. Her daughters barely spoke to her. Her social standing was ruined. She had one option left. If she couldn't win legally, she'd win permanently. She hired someone to kidnap baby Oladapo. The plan was simple. Take the baby, hold him for ransom, force Chioma to sign documents giving up all inheritance claims in exchange for her son's safe return. Once the documents were signed and notarized, kill them both anyway and dispose of the bodies where they'd never be found. It wasn't a good plan. It was the plan of someone who'd lost everything and had nothing left except rage and money. But Tolani didn't care about good plans anymore. She cared about revenge. The kidnapping was set for a Sunday afternoon, when Chioma usually took Oladapo to visit Michael and Blessing. The mansion security knew her routine. The route was predictable. All Tolani needed was someone ruthless enough to snatch a baby from his mother's arms in broad daylight. She found someone, a man who'd done worse for less money, and she paid him 2 million naira up front, with another 3 million promised after the job was done. But what Tolani didn't know was that Chinwe had been listening again, had heard the phone calls, the arrangements, the plan. And this time, Chinwe didn't just warn Chioma, she went to the police. Not the regular Lagos police who could be bribed or ignored. She went to the federal authorities, the ones who investigated high-profile crimes and couldn't be bought as easily. She gave them recordings of Tolani's phone calls. She gave them bank records showing the payment. She gave them everything needed to stop the kidnapping before it happened. And on that Sunday afternoon, when Chioma walked out of the mansion with baby Oladapo and headed toward the car where Chidi waited, she was surrounded not by kidnappers, but by federal agents who arrested Tolani Adeleke for conspiracy to commit kidnapping and murder. The arrest was public, dramatic, and final. Tolani fought and screamed and claimed innocence, but the evidence was overwhelming. The recorded phone calls, the bank transfers, the testimony from Chingwe, her own daughter, who'd chosen justice over family loyalty. Tolani was denied bail, too wealthy, too much flight risk, too dangerous. She'd spend the next year in prison awaiting trial on charges that could put her away for decades. With Tolani in custody, her legal challenges to the will collapsed. There was no one left to fight. The other wives had their own problems and no interest in continuing Tolani's crusade. The daughters were too busy distancing themselves from their mother's crimes. 6 weeks after Tolani's arrest, the probate court issued its final ruling. Baby Oladapo was confirmed as primary heir to Chief Adeleke's estate. All inheritance provisions were activated. Chioma received the house in Surulere, the 20 million naira payment, and monthly support that would continue until Oladapo turned 21. Chidi received his 20% guardianship payment, roughly $82 million after legal fees. The wives and daughters received their trust fund allowances as the will specified, not wealthy by billionaire standards, but comfortable, enough to live well if they managed it properly. And just like that, after a year of schemes and poisoning and legal battles and attempted murder, it was over. Chioma stood in the mansion garden a week after the final ruling, holding 1-year-old Oladapo while he played with fallen flowers. Chidi sat beside them, exhausted from a year of fighting, but finally able to breathe. "We actually did it," Chioma said quietly. "We survived." "You survived," Chidi corrected. "I just helped." "You did more than help. You chose me over guaranteed money. You stayed when you could have walked away. You became—" She paused, searching for the right word. "Family?" Chidi offered. "Yes, family. Not because of blood or marriage certificates or legal guardianship, but because you chose to be." Baby Oladapo chose that moment to take his first unsteady steps, walking from Chioma to Chidi with determination on his tiny face. Both adults lunged forward when he fell, but he made it all the way across before plopping down triumphantly in Chidi's lap. "Did you see that?" Chidi laughed. "He walked! Chioma, he walked!" And watching Chidi celebrate their son's first steps, their son, not the chief's son, not the heir's, but theirs in all the ways that actually mattered, Chioma felt something she hadn't since before her parents died. Hope. Not for wealth or security or revenge against people who'd hurt her, just simple hope that maybe, despite everything, they could build something good from the broken pieces of other people's schemes. 3 months later, Chioma moved into the house in Surulere that Chief Adeleke had promised her. It wasn't a mansion, just a comfortable 4-bedroom home in a middle-class neighborhood, but it was hers, legally, completely hers. Michael and Blessing moved in with her, finally living together as a family again. Michael was preparing for university entrance exams. Blessing was excelling in school and talking about following in Chioma's footsteps by being strong enough to survive anything. Chidi didn't move in, not officially, but he was there most evenings, helping with Oladapo, eating dinner with the makeshift family, building something that didn't have a legal name but felt more real than any marriage contract.
Chinwe visited regularly, estranged from her mother but building a relationship with her nephew that transcended the complications of how he'd come to exist. She was using her own inheritance to study law, determined to fight for people who needed protection like Chioma had needed it. Joseph retired with a generous pension that Chioma insisted on, spending his final years telling anyone who'd listen about the Ajegunle girl who'd survived everyone's worst and still came out kind. And Tolani? Tolani was convicted on all counts and sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. Her empire of manipulation and schemes had finally caught up with her. From her prison cell, she watched her family forget her, her influence evaporate, her legacy become a cautionary tale about what happens when greed becomes everything.
2 years after baby Oladapo's birth, on a quiet evening in the Surulere house, Chidi did something he'd been planning for months. He got down on one knee in front of Chioma while their son played nearby and her siblings watched from the kitchen doorway. "I know this started as business," he said. "I know we both had complicated motives and imperfect choices, but somewhere in all the chaos, you became the person I choose, not because of money or schemes or legal obligations, just because of who you are. So I'm asking, will you marry me? Not for inheritance or guardianship or strategy, just because I love you and I want to build a real life together." Chioma looked at the man who'd paid for her pregnancy to succeed, who'd stayed when money wasn't guaranteed, who'd chosen her over safety again and again. She thought about her parents who died struggling for survival. She thought about Chief Adeleke, who'd asked her to carry his legacy. She thought about everyone who'd tried to destroy her and everyone who'd helped her survive. And she said yes, not because she needed rescuing or security or someone to protect her from danger, but because she wanted partnership. She wanted someone who saw her strength and respected it. She wanted love that had been tested by schemes and poisoning and legal battles and had survived all of it. They married 6 months later in a small ceremony at the Surulere house. No elaborate traditional wedding like the one with Chief Adeleke, no 500 guests or political statements, just family and the few friends who'd proven themselves real. Chinwe was maid of honor. Michael walked Chioma down the makeshift aisle in their living room. Blessing held 2-year-old Oladapo during the ceremony, and Williams, the lawyer who'd confessed his own secrets to save her life, officiated. It wasn't the wedding anyone had planned, but it was honest, and after everything they'd survived, honesty felt more valuable than any elaborate ceremony. As Chioma and Chidi exchanged vows they'd written themselves, promises about choosing each other daily, about building something real from complicated beginnings, about raising Oladapo to value people over wealth, she thought about how far she'd come from that traffic light in Ojuelegba. She'd been a girl selling groundnuts to survive. She'd become a dying billionaire's wife. She'd endured poisoning and schemes and attempted murder. She'd given birth to one of Nigeria's wealthiest heirs. And through all of it, she'd survived not by becoming hard or cruel or greedy, but by staying herself. The girl from Ajegunle who knew how to bend without breaking, who understood that survival sometimes meant accepting help, who chose partnership over pride and love over money and dignity over revenge. Chief Adeleke had asked her to teach his son that legacy wasn't about wealth or male heirs or buildings with your name, and she would. She'd teach Oladapo that real legacy was surviving with your humanity intact, that it was protecting people when it cost you something, that it was making choices that would make your struggling parents proud. As the small wedding party celebrated in the Surulere living room, with affordable catering and music from a phone speaker and joy that didn't require millions to create, Chioma held her husband and her son and thought about the letter Chief Adeleke had written. "Survive this," he'd said, "and forgive an old man for using your strength to build something that might outlast his many mistakes." She'd survived, and what she'd built from his schemes and manipulation and desperate final plan was something he probably never imagined. A family, not built on blood or legal documents or inheritance provisions, but built on choice, on people staying when they could leave, on love that was tested by everything money could buy. That was legacy, and it was worth more than $400 million ever could be.
Years later, when Oladapo was old enough to ask about his complicated origins, Chioma would tell him the truth. About the dying grandfather who'd engineered his existence, about the scheming family members who'd tried to prevent his birth, about the uncle who'd paid extra to give him a chance at life, about the mother who'd survived everything to protect him. And she'd tell him what his grandfather had wanted him to know, that wealth was just money, but choosing people over profit made you rich in ways that actually mattered. But that was future.
For now, in this moment, Chioma danced with her husband in their modest living room while their son laughed and her siblings clapped, and the weight of a year of fighting finally lifted. She was 24 years old. She'd survived poverty and poisoning and schemes that should have destroyed her. She'd given birth to a billionaire heir. She'd fought legal battles against people with unlimited resources. And she'd won. Not because she was lucky, not because she was manipulative or cruel or willing to compromise her values, but because she was exactly what Chief Adeleke had recognized that first day, strong enough to survive anything and kind enough to stay herself while doing it. The girl from Ajegunle had become the mother of an empire's heir, and she'd done it without losing the parts of herself that made her worth knowing in the first place. That was the real inheritance, not money or property or legal documents, but the ability to survive life's worst without becoming the kind of person who created that worst for others. And as Chioma looked around her small house filled with people who'd chosen to love her not for what she could give them, but for who she was, she knew that this imperfect, complicated, hard-won life was worth every struggle it had taken to build it. If you enjoy thrilling African stories, don't forget to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and tell us where you are watching from. Your support means the world to us. Because stories like this matter. Stories about poor girls who survive rich people's schemes. Stories about choosing people over profit. Stories about building real legacy from the broken pieces of other people's manipulation. Chioma's story isn't over. Baby Oladapo will grow up with questions. The remaining wives and daughters will have their own reactions to being cut out of primary inheritance. Williams's confession about Ngozi's paternity will have ripple effects through that entire family. And somewhere in federal prison, Tolani is already plotting what she'll do when she's eventually released. But for now, for this moment, Chioma has won. She's survived, she's built a family from chaos, and she's proven that sometimes the most dangerous thing a poor girl can do is refuse to break when wealthy people try to destroy her. Because surviving with your humanity intact, that's the real power, and no amount of money can buy it or take it away.